So, anyways, thank you for the reminder. We continue with the historical factors, which was so just a summary, as we were saying. Um, the sorry, this is the uh, I was talking about, what was it? The sociological factor with the empress just now we saw a while ago. Then we have the theological factor, which was very poor formation, um, or very biased or focused only on one aspect, which was the juridical. And then there is also the political factor in history, that the abuse of religion by political powers and the pressure that we will always have, by people in power. So something that we can learn from these historical factors is never to take sides, because our tendency would be to take sides politically also, or even sociologically, even theologically we can take sides, but just to realize that nobody has the whole picture, only God has it. So as church, we don't have to try to define what God should be. We just have to accompany people to know God, as based on what we know, but always knowing that we can know more, and so that we don't polarize positions. Second, the problem of ideology because of the lack of a sense of history. This is what we were talking about in Fratelli Tutti, the new document of the Pope. And he says the problem, if young people lose a sense of history, they will be very easily manipulated by ideologies. But if you know your history, you know the human process, you will know what are authentic values and what are not. But if not, you are just attracted by beautiful ideas. And this can happen to us in our mission also. No, that's why in our faith, we have to be careful not to become fundamentalists also. And we have always to touch the anthropological side, our humanity, our human experience, human needs, etc., so that we will not fall into a kind of ideological preaching, of our faith also. And how do we do that? Know your history. Know your history. What really happened. And thirdly, historical consciousness implies humility. To know our history, to want to know our history, implies a lot of humility to reconcile with our own humus. Humus meaning soil. Soil meaning that's the root word of humility or humanity even. And this means our own personal history. Sometimes we can take extremes, especially in our formation, human formation. Sometimes we say don't focus too much on that, which is true. No, we are not just a bunch of feelings and our past. We are not made up of our past, etc. But there's a healthy search also of self-knowledge to try to realize a bit of what happened to us, and to realize there are things we can value in our past, and there are things that we need to also heal in our past. There's a psychologist or counselor, some kind of expert, who's called Carl Rogers, Carl Rogers. I really invite you, if you want to deepen a bit more. His main concept in his counseling, and something we can apply to ourselves. Once again, don't make it absolute or polarize things. But something helpful he says is one of the basic theories of counseling is follow the pain. For counseling, when there are issues, not coaching. Coaching is not about it's not counseling, it's different. Coaching is about helping to promote the person and give skills. But there's another side of human formation, which is counseling, identifying issues, helping the first person not to be afraid to follow the painful experiences, because behind the pain is a lost value. Now, this is his, I'm already going into another area, but anyways, this is a learning, okay? Lost value. Why do I feel pain? Because I lost something that I value. Whatever it could be. It could be, typical things, no? We talk about father wound, for example. It's because I like the relationship that I want with my own father or mother. And when I didn't get it, there was pain. And the tendency of survival is to, of course, just avoid that pain and try to find other ways to be happy. No, and so what Carl Rogers says is if you do that, you just avoid it and you try to be happy, you will never rediscover that value you lost. So when you follow the pain courageously enough, try to reconcile with your history, your humors, you will rediscover what that value is. And your evangelization will also promote that value and not cover it up. No, so it gives a very human evangelization of rediscovering and rebuilding humanity in others. So somehow when we have this historical consciousness, we really need a lot of humility to go back, to those areas that cause pain to our history communitarily, but also personally. Okay, now we are progressing through history. We move from Trent, then we move for the next 2 centuries, and now we're in the 18th century. And we know what happened in the 18th century. It was about it started a bit earlier, no? All this Illuminism, Enlightenment, the French Revolution, science against faith, because faith is abusing us. It was too abused by politics and manipulated, so people started to promote science against religion, and that means against faith. Although nowadays we know that they don't have to be one against another, but once again it was politically charged, this issue. So this Benedictine abbot, it says here, in charge of bringing the practice of university reform in the field of theology in the theological faculty of Prague or France, studies that the empress would approve. Okay, once again, our dear empress appears for the first time a pastoral as its own entity, and this is very important. Uh, Not the empress part, which can be also, that somehow women have this more spiritual orientation, to culture even, and it's interesting to note, just to admit, women have something to do with incorporating spirituality with culture, but at the same time, that pastoral became independent from politics. Okay, so this was a very big step, that there was actually a beginning to reflect on pastoral action that is nothing to do with politics, but with the spiritual focus. And this is where somehow things started to really develop in pastoral theology, all the way until Second Vatican Council. And what we have in Second Vatican Council was not an invention by the council, but it was really collecting all these theological reflections done from those past 2 centuries, and to implement them pastorally. So it's again nice to see the council had a historical consciousness of what was going on. So what are the orientations of this new pastoral theology, of this monk, this abbot? Is the exclusivity of the person of the pastor, meaning he is no longer a functionary of the state, but he's a pastor in the image of Christ. So that is a very big difference. Another promotion of the Council of Trent. Okay. The devotion to the Sacred Heart. You might be surprised to know that it was started in the Council of Trent. Trent was the one that proclaimed, at least, no, I mean, it didn't start there. No, it was promoted in Trent to be the devotion of the priest, of the pastor, that we should be shepherds according to the heart of the good shepherd, the heart of Jesus. So the orientation of theology itself started to shift, in the pastoral theology, but still very focused on the pastor bonus, the good pastor, and preparing for that task. So one was a focus on the pastor. Second, the focus on the duties of the pastor. And this is where we started to inherit this way of considering our threefold mission. For the priests and the bishops, they call it teaching, sanctifying, and governing. But for the baptized, which came later, so this set the basis to think of our mission as priest, prophet, and king. Okay, so it's interesting to see that the reflection on the priesthood led to the reflection on the common priesthood of the faithful. Of course, this was done more by Martin Luther because he was more interested in the priesthood, the common priesthood, no, of all the Christians. But the Catholic Church stressed on the other side, which is the priest, the ministerial priesthood. So teaching is prophetic, sanctifying is our priestly ministry, our priestly mission, and governing our kingly mission. No? So there's a correlation you can see there. Um, so why am I saying all this? You can see there's always two sides of the coin, and we need to always see both sides, no, to appreciate uh, how things developed, and not one against the other. And the last orientation. So the first orientation was the person. Second orientation was the duties. But the third orientation, which is very interesting for us, is the method of study. Okay, so somehow they started to consider three areas of pastoral formation. Who is the person, what he does, and how he forms himself. Unfortunately, or perhaps part of the historical process, that how or that method was very deductive because of the historical situation. Nowadays, it's a bit more inductive, both deductive, inductive, still very deductive, but a little bit more inductive. Um, but at least we see that it was part of the process, So at least they had a method at that time, and then now we grow from there to make it even more inductive or balanced. So this was the significance of this abbot, who really made pastoral theology really for spiritual reasons. So what is the achievement of this epoch that we see? To establish a connection between theology and society, although only in a deductive manner. At least there was a connection between society and faith. As I said a while ago, it may be just catechism that the people know, but there is a connection at least. And how can we make the most of that? Not to leave it only deductive, information lang, intellectual formation, but also the holistic, the human side as well. Okay, so any questions so far? Anything you'd like to clarify? Um, Perhaps it's already very understandable, no? I think all these implications. Um, so another big,
Sorry,
yeah, go,
I have
go.
one question. You mentioned that there was like how do you say this, independence of the pastoral more or less by this century.
Mhm,
I was asking myself, no, maybe this could be also one of the reason why there was already like this separation of the church and the state. I don't know if it was a part of it or later on that will be more formalized.
mhm, mhm,
Because right now, as we see, there is this separation of the religion and the politics. That
mhm.
before, in our history, was not visible. Can you
Yeah,
clarify that part?
okay. Yeah, good question and a good observation because, well, I would say there is always a official process of the church, but there's also an unofficial process. Unofficial meaning probably people already thought long ago that we should separate it, but it was not officially pronounced by the church. Um, and the motivations could be theological, meaning somebody reflected about it, maybe like this monk, or it could be historical, because the church state separation actually forced us to think of theology as separate from politics. I mean, separate in the sense that it should not be conditioned by politics. So, which came first? No, was it the historical thing that came first that made us reflect, or was it the theological motivation that came first? We don't really know. Maybe a bit of both. Not the whole church at the same time, but most probably people already thought about it. But it was not yet accepted because of political pressure, because the church was has its imperfections. So when was it really proposed to separate state and church was Second Vatican Council. Um, and I will tell you, there are still cardinals who don't agree. so, so, and they have their points of view why we should not separate, because the church has its influence today because also of its political influence. If the church doesn't have political influence, so for example, you coming back to China again. Oh, sorry, this is like a pet topic. When Pope Francis did not sign the agreement yet, no, with the government. You're not going to share this video, right? So, so anyways, um, they still had a political stance, the underground church, not the clandestine church. Why? Because the Vatican is a political entity that defends us. But after he signed that agreement, they do not have any more that political say. Because why? Basically, they already belong to their own political culture. So, meaning they have no way of defending themselves. You can talk about dialogue, you can talk about freedom of speech, but in a context where you don't have that freedom, uh, sometimes political influence helps, you know, to continue your practice. So, can they be better Christians by being persecuted? By being persecuted, of course, no. There's always the gift of martyrdom. But if you think about promoting Christian culture and the culture of our faith, it has its implications. So there are, I think, valid reasons why there are some who don't agree with the church-state separation. That the church still needs to be a political reality in order to have its influence in the world. So it's kind of complex, and that's why again we shouldn't polarize things a yes or no. We have to see how things develop in history also. And yeah, okay, so it could be very idealistic or ideal to have this separation, but it's not so clear cut as that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. No, more or less
Yes. It answered a lot.
that's the
Thank you.
sense, no, where it goes.
Mhm.
So if we look at the 19th, 18th, 19th centuries, that's where this development really started to take off. What kind of development? Pastoral, but historical also. So historical consciousness started to really grow. Why? Because the studies of history became very easy. No, there were new sciences to study history. Uh, Writing and printing became very easy. The library started to be developed. So a sense of history really started to grow. And the church herself benefited from these new sciences of history and started to analyze it herself. No, I didn't know that happened. Oh, maybe we can see what were the causes there. And this school of Tübingen is one of those schools that really promoted uh, that kind of consciousness, of history and pastoral analysis. So some of these names, Moeller, just one of those names, no? So important for these steps, but a name. So he promoted a new ecclesiology that was taken up in Vatican II. So focusing on life, the life of the church, life and the church. So again, this dichotomy between faith and life, which was the problem. Moeller presented an ecclesiology that does not separate the state from the church. Okay, let me explain this. So there's a need to separate theology from politics, but at the same time, there is value in seeing the church as a part of society and not radically separated from society. So, in this sense, the church is very much connected to the daily life of people in society, even Christians, and should inform and be participative in the life of the world, no, of society. So this was his new kind of ecclesiology, because before we have what we call the perfect society. No, the church is a perfect society. It doesn't need the world. It cannot be complemented by the world. It's perfect by itself. So if you want to be saved, just join the church and you're okay. That was how it was. So, but now it's more like the sense of we are fellow pilgrims, church and society, church and world. We are journeying together, and so let's help each other with the gifts that we have, to offer. So it says here, no, a fundamental concept for the church: dependence on the Spirit and its relationship with the incarnate Word. So you notice a lot of implications of a historical nature. Incarnate Word is in history, no, in time. Eternity stepped into time so we could understand. No, so all this is about a historical understanding of the church, no, of God. Um, and so this has repercussions on how we do pastoral theology. Then it means we need to have a more human touch in our approach. The same Moller, talking about this influence on ecclesiology. Um, so meaning this way of understanding church had its influence on what pastoral should be, as we already said, uh, had to wait, but of course, once again, this comes back to the question of Jello a little bit, people already thought about it, he thought about it, but it was not accepted by the church. So because power is attractive, political influence is still very, to separate yourself makes you feel privileged, and it's also attractive, and we talk about that in terms of clericalism as well. So a new form of conceiving the church has its origin in these ideas, as well as the pastoral action that was to bear abundant fruit later on. So okay, let's try to move from here. Just So these are just two key points of the reform in the Tübingen school in Germany: biblical, theological, and ecclesiological. So pastoral theology was not just about how to preach or how to reach out, how to organize meetings, how to be a leader. This it started to expand. It became biblical. We need to follow the model of scriptures. How did God pastor us, shepherd us scripturally? In the New Testament, but also in the Old Testament. Uh, Theologically, how should pastoral action be? That I don't need to just do things for the sheep, but I have to be the good shepherd to the sheep. So it's very different. There's a theological identity to being a pastor already. Or for us, we apply to be a missionary. Uh, so you notice this gives a different nuance. It's no longer just about activities. It's about who I am, how I behave also, to others. Ecclesiologically also was part of the reform. So it's not just about building, how do you say, a place where people can gather, but what kind of gathering should this be? So ecclesiology means church, no? How do we present the idea of church, the idea of Christian community? And this is what this ecclesiological aspect also showed. So for example, to understand this a bit more, it's if I present an ecclesiology that's very pyramidal, pyramid. It means the priest is on top, the bishops, and then the sisters, the religious, and then the lay. This will affect the kind of communities that we will build. But if I believe in an ecclesiology of communion, means we are all the same, but in the same, we are equals in dignity, just with different roles. Then the way that we present the Christian community will be very different also. In Bourbon Day, we have three branches. Do we present it as a pyramid? First, the priest, no, and then the brothers and the sisters, the couples, more or less there, but somehow lower than the sisters. No, even though they're missionaries, but they have just bonds lang, not vows. Okay, just bonds. And so not so consecrated as we are. And then the next will be the Verbal Day family. So they are fully laid, no sense of consecration. So if we have this pyramid way of considering this in Verbum Dei, we will project it in the way that we live. Um, but if we have this communion sense, then we will also project that we are all equal, we are working together, just different roles, that's all. Um, and it can be seen in the way we do apostolate. No? So the ecclesiology also affects our concept of church, our concept of the states of life, will affect the way we organize ourselves.
My question, sorry,
Yeah, go.
is there any particular name for that kind of model that we live out here in Verbum Day? If the other model is pyramidical,
Mhm.
what do you call the other model?
Our model now, basically, we have gone through a long process, no? So the final, I'll just say the final model is missionary communion. Okay, so we went from pyramid, hierarchical, to communion, Vatican II, that's Vatican II communion. And post Vatican II, we said it's not just a communion for itself, it's a missionary communion. So it's nice to trace the difference, how do you say, steps to see why we emphasize one thing or the other. No, so we are missionary communion. Okay, basically. So this, have you heard of endiadis? Endiadis, it's a term that says endiadis is a term that says two words will help you to understand a concept better than the two words themselves. so we are very fond of this in philosophy, but also in theology. So one thing is to say communion. So you understand something from communion. But when you say missionary, you also understand something. But when you say missionary in the light of communion, you understand something more than missionary. And when you start to understand communion in the light of missionary, you understand something even more than the two words missionary and communion put together. so that is part of our contemplation, if you like words, no? And that is somehow, actually, I'm not joking. This is somehow the way that we're trying to perceive our way forward. And constantly, this tension between missionary and communion will help us to formulate our way of life along the way. No? So thank you for the question. Yeah, we are missionary communion.
Thank you.
So okay, so just I'm showing you this slide here, basically just to show that what are the elements that need to inform pastoral theology. Very important. It's not just about our actions. Okay, maybe sometimes we look at our apostolic means, we just think of the actions we do. We think of the itinerary, what's the next step? We think about the essential elements of a community life. No, we have to put this, put that in the project. But we need to go further to see what are the biblical and theological implications of what we do and the ecclesiological model that we are projecting in the midst of doing that. Okay, that's why we have 1 month retreats, I think, to ponder this. Because the daily life is a bit difficult. So, okay, so anyways, just very quickly, of course, biblical theological means the sacred scripture is the foundation of pastoral theology. And that's why we always have Bible passages. No, we reflect on our mission based on scriptures, on Jesus. We see that in our month retreats also. So it's very important not to reflect without scriptural foundations of why we want to do something. Second, when we say, by the way, when we say scriptures, it means Jesus also. Okay, the word, especially Jesus. Then biblical, theological, the same thing again. Preaching and catechesis was the most important task at that time. So the initiations, remember we talked about initiation, discipleship, apostolic stage. The initiation stage at that time was preaching. The discipleship stage was catechism. No apostolic stage. Okay. That one only the pastor lang. No, we reserve it to the pastor. So, but there was initiation and there was discipleship. And somehow we can also learn from that how to distinguish what kind of preaching do we give in the initiation stage? What kind of ministry of the word do we do in the discipleship stage also? Okay, again, don't separate them or only this type or only that type, okay? But it's more like the emphasis that we give, because we always need to preach somehow in every stage. Okay, main contribution was to situate the mission of the pastor in the ecclesiological conception at the service of revelation. Okay, deductive. Revelation means God came to show us who he was. If not, we will not be saved. So it's very deductive from the top. Okay. Um, yeah, but the benefit is it overcame the utilitarian tendencies of the earlier pastoral theology. Okay. Uh, so it sounds like repeating itself, no? But basically it's about that, no? To purify the theology from just being functionary. And Pope Francis also says, no, we shouldn't be functionaries, but it's a vocation of the Good Shepherd. Okay, what time is it? 10:34. Let's. So here, this is a term that Jaime Bonnet uses also before, used to alter Christus. That's why it's so strong. The faith, the truth of faith to be Christ, is the goal. So somehow Jaime Bonnet himself was formed in this way of thinking that our goal is to be a good shepherd. That's why the icon for the truth of faith normally is John 10. No, it's not a coincidence, no, or invention by Jaime Bonnet. To be another Christ, no alter Christus, not alter ego, alter Christus. So, so it's a step towards the image of the pastor, okay, uh, and it gave a Christological dimension. So you remember it was biblical, theological, then it was ecclesiological, and now it is Christological. So all these are the disciplines that you're going to study in the future: Christology, ecclesiology, theology, scriptures. So you can see here how the pastoral theology tries to integrate all these. And the Christological dimension, of course, is Christ, not the Good Shepherd. Okay, I think we don't need to repeat so many of this. Uh-huh. So the main point of the ecclesiology is who is the subject of mission, who is the protagonist, not just the priest, the pastor, but the whole church. Okay, that was the main contribution. What was the setback? Never mind. So some on and off, somebody will come and go back to the perfect society and the hierarchical concept. Okay, so this guy was something like that. So back and forth, progress, regress, and then again, this is it practical theology or pastoral theology? Should it focus only on the pastor, or should it focus on the practical life of the church as a church? Um, Again, no, back and forth, back and forth. And then uh, this one is about, okay, the focusing, okay, I'll just read it. Still centers on the pastoral theology, on the action of the pastor, almost becoming a manual of set formulas for action of the pastor. So no more creativity, just following rules. Okay, basically that. As an administrator, not the pastor, as an administrator. This is the critique of Pope Francis, that we are more than administrators as parish priests or whatever kind of priest, no, or whatever kind of pastoral role, even the lay. We're not just administrators. We need to imitate the Good Shepherd. So, okay, the 19th century was a movement from the pastoral manuals, pastors of the church and their office, and the office is defined in terms of cura animarum. Okay, care of souls. There's a historical background of this term, care of souls. It was also from Trent, once again, Trent, our good friend, and was re-emphasized in Vatican I, that the main pastoral duty of the church is to take care of souls. What is the problem with this term? It was only applied to the priests. Okay, when you see cura animarum, it means the pastoral role of the priest. And it's a very individualistic perception of salvation. To care for your soul, that's it. Not for your body, not for your community, not for your family or society. but for your soul. And we just want to save your soul. And even our canon law until today, the last number says all these laws will not be applicable for the sake of the salvation of souls. No? So it's still about the soul. Okay, so that's somehow our heritage until today. In terms of the contents of pastoral action, the manuals polarize on the ministry to guide and the task of the governing of the community, again, administrative role. Okay, the relationship was rather juridical and described through pastoral techniques. So very little theology and spirituality. Okay, I'll just try to go quickly. An exception was this guy, I don't know how do you read his name? Swoboda. Sounds Chinese, no? Swoboda. So he came from a concrete situation of the parishes in the cities, and he said, this doesn't work in the new context of big cities. So what is the point here is that in the big cities, the rural concept of the parish priest doesn't function anymore. I am the shepherd, I take care of everybody comes to church, and I'm the head of the town. This didn't work anymore in the cities. And that's very important for Verbum Day to reflect also. How can we do apostolate in the cities? Gather people to our schools, or is there another way to reach out? No? Okay, so we've done this. Vatican I. Just now there was a question and the break. Now, what is the role of Vatican I? So you can see here it was very apologetic, not because it felt sorry for itself, but it's always very defensive because it was a time that modernism was threatening the roots of the church, not the roots of Christianity, okay, not the roots of faith. It was challenging the roots of the church as a society by itself. So we have to be very apologetic in the sense of defensive against modernism that was criticizing the church. Yeah, so this was the kind of theology that was being taught in seminaries, and priests also had a very apologetic formation, how to defend the church from a deductive perspective. Secondly, here it says the trends were marked by the theme of hierarchy, authority, that hierarchy is valid, authority is important in the church. Why? Because it's being challenged. Basically, that's it. So the center of the ecclesiology is the power of the priest, or the bishop in that sense. Okay, so we represent Jesus Christ. You represent the sheep. Okay, so all you need to do is just listen to us because you want to follow Jesus. So that was the model of church at that time. Okay, that's why nowadays, just a little theological trivia. Nowadays, pneumatology is very important. Pneumatology meaning the spirit. Okay, pneuma, ruach. No ruach. So the ruach is the part that is outside the hierarchy. So if you as a hierarchy says that you represent Christ, then we as charisms, we represent the Holy Spirit. So without Christ, there's no Holy Spirit. But without the Holy Spirit, Christ would not have been incarnated either. So that is our point of debate and argument, and makes theology more exciting. Okay, so this aspect, why we have pneumatology is basically because of that the Spirit works beyond the hierarchy of the church. Vatican I. Totality of the people of God and the lay were totally absent in the theological discourses. So no concept of people of God, just the hierarchy, okay, in charge of the pastoral action. Okay, so both ecclesiological and pastoral reacted against historicism. So you remember there was a greater historical consciousness, but Vatican I rejected it. Okay, so that's part of our history. So no, we are not historical. We are a divine structure. We are already in heaven. So don't say that we are still developing. We have the fullness of the truth already. Okay, so don't question the fullness of the truth in the church. Um, it's true, we have the fullness of the truth in Jesus Christ, but another thing is, do we fully understand the truth? That is what where the debate is nowadays. No, we believe that we have the fullness of the means of salvation, but we don't understand all of it yet. But the Vatican I was stressing that no, we already understand everything, so don't question us. Uh, just now there was a question. So, did anything good come out of Vatican I? No, was it all just a negative, defensive, totalitarian kind of council? And the answer is yes and no. Okay, yes, we need to read it in the historical context. Once again, the historical situation. So they needed to defend itself. The church had to defend its own existence. Okay, so somehow there was no choice. No, they had to do that. But no, so no, because of that kind of, it didn't contribute in that kind of attitude. But yes, in the sense that it gave basis for Vatican II. Why do we call Second Vatican Council the second one? Because it's a continuation of the first one. So the first one set very clear doctrinal principles that we carried on to the Second Vatican Council. But the Vatican Council was more on a pastoral council, how to bring these doctrines to a pastoral level. So we don't reject Vatican I, we don't reject all the valid teachings of Vatican I, but we just want to make it more pastoral in its approach. Okay, in its language as well. No, anathema sit. No, they are condemned. Those who go to the Protestant churches and join their services are condemned. So this was Vatican I. Okay, so it's the language, the way of expressing our doctrines. That's what they wanted to modify. Okay, okay, so let's see. Anything else? Vatican I. Exaggeratedly concerned with the institutional element. Can be problem there also. Okay, so first half of the 20th century, pastoral repercussion of the theology of the mystical body. Um, it's interesting here, right? Jaime was ordained in the Eucharistic Congress, right, 1952. The Pope at the time was Pius XII, and he was the one who wrote this document called Mystical Body. It's very interesting to see the connection between his focus on mystical body and the times of the church, you know? But at the same time, we need to purify this idea of mystical body, because the idea of mystical body for Pius XII was still very hierarchical. Okay, so Jaime took the concept of mystical body in the sense of mutual cooperation between the clergy and the lay. Um, and that is very strong in Verbum Dei. The mutual collaboration. Actually, we have this phrase, we can never meditate enough how the salvation of many depends on the prayers and sacrifices of the few. I think you've heard that before, Jaime Bonnet. But if you look at the document, what it actually says is we can never meditate enough how the salvation of many depends on the mutual collaboration between the clergy and the lay. It's very interesting. So already there was a recognition of the need of the cooperation of the lay, but still in a very second degree, no? But the intuitions were already there in the ecclesiology. So that was, oh, I can't even see that. Can you see it better like that? So you're asking, so this is now Vatican II, moving towards Vatican II, the second half of the 20th century now. Now we recognize church as people of God, no, not just the hierarchy of the church. We recognize ecclesiology of communion, not just as a pyramid. We recognize a shared pastoral, not just the exclusive right and duty of the priests and bishops. So, so this is somehow where we are now, not yet fully assimilated by the church, but the teaching that we are trying to promote. No, and the concrete implication for us as Verbum Dei of this church as people of God, ecclesiology of communion, and shared pastoral is the shared pastoral that we want to promote. What is family, Verbum Dei family? No, new structures and pastoral techniques that need to arise from the evangelizing action of the church. Once again, missionary communion. The way we structure ourselves must depend on our missionary action. Okay, that's why yesterday we are talking about apostolic projects. No, it's very interesting. Our mission, the needs at that place will determine how we structure our project, no, even our lives. So this is already there in this shared pastoral. Specialized movements of French Catholic action, this was in the past. Um, Catholic action was actually a political movement, no, for the church. That's why it was so supported by the popes that time. And then the movement of the worker priests, which they say that Jaime Bonnet participated for a short time lang, not such an exaggerated 1 year or 2 years, but just to experience. Uh, the point here is the priest to feel himself in the working class. Uh, if you like, no, even for us, it's very interesting to reflect in our own formation. Are we immersing ourselves with those who are the least in society? No, are we having a formation that separates us from those who suffer most in society? How can we have more means uh, to immerse ourselves, no, and so to feel one? So that was what Jaime Bonnet himself wanted to experience, no, in his own ministry. And lastly, here the movement of parish renewal. Well, not lastly, no. So this was something that is a movement that continues to carry on today, where parishes try to imitate missionary movements. So this is something we need to meditate a lot, because if parishes become missionary in nature, what is our role as a missionary community? Okay, this is something worth to think about. Okay, if parishes all become missionary like we are, which is what we're trying to do, so what will be our place then as a missionary community? Do we still have a place in the church? Is that why we are afraid to promote the parishes to be more missionary as much as we are, you know, our own spirituality in contributing to the church? Very long term. No, it's an exaggerated question, but something worth to think about. And different. Okay, so all this is about the diocesan church, no, discovering itself as an evangelical and theological unit, not just as a place of activities, which is still happening today. And this one following becomes necessary. The knowledge of the world, as we said, knowledge of the church, and integration of ecclesial actions that tend to end with a fragmentary pastoral action. This was so. Anyways, the point here is that our activities have to become meaningful theologically. Okay, so we don't separate. Now it's time for activity, and now it's time for prayer. Okay, but that our activities can become prayerful in the sense that they have theological meaning for us, and that's where spiritual exercises come in to help us to uh, integrate for the people the meaning of their activity in a theological and scriptural way, not an ecclesiological way. Okay, so a lot of these slides are just sorry, actually I didn't prepare the slide, but they're somehow repeating certain things, no? Okay, never mind. I think all this is not so. So anyway, you get the main idea of the shared pastoral, that we have to build up a kind of theological relationship, you know, with the lay people. So do they need to study theology, our lay people? It's something we need to consider in our own formation process. Okay, let's take a break, okay, before we go to Vatican II. So this is the juicy part in the whole history. But we can, now it's what, 10:53. So shall we meet at 11:10? Just meet at 11:10, okay? And then we will come see you soon.
Thank you.